Where do you stand on crypto today? Are you still bullish?
Yeah. So any new technology, I don't care what it is, and I've been involved with a lot of new technologies, disruptive technologies. I could take you back to the early days of streaming when we were the very first commercial streaming company, and right off the bat, it was hard to use. You know, if you think back to 1995 and you wanted to stream just audio, you had to have a subscription with an internet service provider. Then to make that work, you had to download a client which had a TCP/IP client. Then you had to download a streaming audio client, you know, and you had to have the right kind of modem. There were all these pieces that had to fit together. It was complicated. And so the uptake was big for sports fans and, you know, big news junkies, and everybody else were like, dude, you're an idiot. I'll just turn on my TV. You know, I'll just turn on the radio. What the hell do I have to go through all that hassle to just listen to a sporting event? We reached that initial stage, and then all of a sudden it got a little bit boring, right? Because you had to wait for the new applications to come along. You know, we had to wait for live to come along. We had to wait for video to come along. Well, with crypto, it's very analogous to that. We're in the early hassle phases. Now, the very earliest of crypto, you know, however you want to decide the beginning with Bitcoin or whatever, has been around 12 years. But in terms of applications with smart contracts, that's only 2017 for the most part. And so we're really only 5 years in. So I'm still really bullish on crypto. We had some early wins, just like, you know, streaming audio with sports and news. Now, you know, with crypto, you have DeFi and you have, you know, money transfer and some other applications. There's no reason why crypto is going to be any different. But the good news is, you know, the investments I'm looking to make are geared towards applications that'll be mainstream and not about, okay, let's create an Instagram for crypto. Let's create a Twitter. Not Me Too type applications. More like, okay, things that take advantage of smart contracts and distributed environments.
Over the last 24 months, Mark Cuban has become one of the most forthright figures in the crypto space, becoming a huge bull on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a number of other projects. In his most recent interview with Forbes, Cuban explains why he remains extremely bullish on the entire sector, despite the recent wave of bad news. He argues that investors are still extremely early with the majority of the huge opportunities in crypto. Cuban will discuss why he is keeping an eye on the applications that will be built on blockchain technology and why he believes the big winners will be those that play to the strengths of smart contracts. Make sure to watch until the end of the video to hear Cuban explain why an investor is never too late or too old to capitalize on the opportunities that present themselves. Please like the video and subscribe to our channel to stay updated about the latest news in crypto and stock markets. Also, we are curious to hear your thoughts on Mark Cuban's approach. Leave a comment below the video and we will reply. Enjoy the rest of the interview.
But what are some ideas and topics that make you excited?
NFTs as books, I think particularly for textbooks. Now, whether or not we can get the college textbook publishers to go along is another issue. But, you know, the idea of kids buying books for classes today, my daughter just went to Vanderbilt. So the whole process of buying books, you know, first, do you want to buy new or used, right? Then you lug these books back, and then at the end of the semester, because they're only good for the time you were in the class, you make the decision. You know, yeah, I'm going to sell it. How do I sell it? Do I ship it off? Do I take it to the bookstore? It's just a pain in the ass, and in a digital world, it's ridiculous. And, you know, with those as NFTs, well, the NFTs allow you to apply royalties that when that book is resold, the author and the publisher and whoever else is involved can get a set royalty fee. So that means that, you know, the publishers and people who created the book can keep on getting paid, whereas when there's a physical book that gets sold and resold, they have to hope that book falls apart, you know, and so that they can sell a new one. And so I think that's a great application. As I talked about environmental impact with trading of carbon offsets, I think insurance, being able to very easily buy insurance. But I think in terms of the home run type applications, and more complicated, longer to develop type things, you know, I think things like health insurance, right? The whole process of getting a claim pre-approved or approved after the fact is horrible. Nobody likes dealing with their insurance company, their health insurance company. First of all, for pre-approvals, you never know whether or not you'll get pre-approved or not. And when you go, it's not like the UK where you just go to the NHS and you just hope they have it, not if you'll get approved. You know, here it's like, all right, I have this need, the doctor's prescribing it for me, but I can't afford to pay it out of pocket. And so what am I going to do if my insurance company doesn't approve it? Well, with crypto, you could reinvent how insurance claims are pre-approved or approved by creating an environment where you have 1,000 validators. There's different types of roll-ups, optimistic roll-up where you have validators and challengers, right? So you could train people to be a validator and pay them every time they validate, approve or don't approve a claim. The optimistic roll-up side of it, the challengers will say, okay, you didn't approve this, but not for the right reason. Your training says you should have approved it. I'm challenging it. So anything that you're staking that you put up to get paid for that, I get, and that keeps it honest. That's just a crypto way of keeping things honest. And so that type of application has scale, it has impact, and it's better in a decentralized, wide and flat organization than vertically integrated company like our traditional companies. And I know that's deep in the weeds, but that's the reality, right? You've got, any tech advancement, you've got to start, Steve Jobs had this great saying. He said, everything's a remix. And you have to look at new technologies and look at things the way they're being done and say, okay, how can I remix these together? How can I do a mashup in music terms, right? And if you can mash this stuff up and have it make sense and make it easier and better for people to use, that's a big win. Work 6 days a week, getting up early, coming home late. Lost an eye. Physically was just beat the hell up. Crawling in cars, pulling out seats, cutting the tops off to turn them into convertibles. It was just, he busted his ass to do what he could for us. But he always smiled, and he was always great. And he just gave me the attitude that, work is work, but, you only have one life. And, it's interesting to me that, one of the questions people always ask me is, what would you tell your younger self? And they allude to the fact that, what would you tell your 16 or 17 or 18-year-old self? And really, that's not the self I would want to talk to. What my dad taught me was, talk to your 40-year-old self, your 50-year-old self, because we hit 40 and we think we're old. We hit 50 and you're going to think you're old. You're not. He was adamant about the fact that today's the youngest you're going to be, and you got to live young and be young and act young and feel young. The young 40-year-old, the young 50-year-old, that's who needs to hear it. And I learned that from my dad, and that was the most impactful thing. And then my wife and my kids, they don't listen to me, but I've learned to listen to them and realize that it's their world. It's not. And what I do today that can make their future better and brighter is important, and that the game is different, whether it's climate change, whether it's healthcare. My generation's an embarrassment, seriously. When I was 16, 17, 18, it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and I thought we were gonna, Abby Hoffman was taking over college campuses, or storming buildings and taking over the president of the college's offices, and we were going to be the revolutionaries that changed the world. We turned into the people who watch, TV news all the time and make all our decisions from watching newscasts. That's an embarrassment. I want to avoid that and try to fight that off and try to learn as much as I can from my kids. And I'll give you one quick example. I love to read, and I try to get my son, in particular my middle daughter, to read, and they're like, nah, we get it from video. And early on I was adamant, and then one day my son, and my daughter has examples too, but my son started asking me Shark Tank questions, and he was asking me, why don't I do royalty deals? And I started explaining, well, it eats up cash flow and it reduces gross margin. I'm like, do you know what gross margin is? And he was like, yeah, it's the difference between your sales price and your cost of goods sold. I'm like, well, how did you, he was like 10 years old, 9, 10 years old. I'm like, how did you learn that? TikTok. And it made me realize that they weren't the one with the problem. I was the one holding on to things the way I did it, thinking that was the only way to do it. And I think that's what my kids are teaching me, that a lot of the things that my generation might look down on for my kids, they got it right and we got it wrong.
Please like the video and subscribe to our channel to stay updated about the latest news in crypto and stock markets. Also, we are curious to hear your thoughts on Mark Cuban's approach. Leave a comment below the video and we will reply.